As President Biden looks to raise taxes on the rich, our next guest, who has advised multiple presidents on the economy, says there's no size limit on U.S. spending or taxation, which could create a potential train wreck in 2025. Join us now, former World Bank President David Malpass. And we've been, ever since the budget came out, David, we've been talking about it. Yeah, you can definitely raise taxes and supposedly cut the deficit by $3 trillion. But almost everyone agrees, back with Simpson-Bowles, it should be spending cuts, and if you want to try to figure out a way of increasing revenue. There's no spending cuts that they're talking about now. It's we had pandemic spending, and then we had the same level after the pandemic, which makes no sense.
That's right. Washington is in disarray. I started in the budget process in 1984 with the Senate Budget Committee. It's gotten worse almost year by year since then. The national debt is exploding, and we really need growth now. And when you look at the consequences, what's happening is the government is spending so much money that it hurts production, and we're seeing it around the economy. Raising taxes, you said they'd raise $3 trillion. I don't think they would. They always overestimate how much they can do because, people respond. When the taxes go up, they produce less of it. As you look at the number of problems that we're facing, the Boeing problem you just led in with, companies are having to go to the European alternative. On semiconductors, look at what happened. The DEI craze or really focus undercut the ability of the U.S. to even make semiconductors. So Japan's doing it, China's doing it, Taiwan and South Korea are doing it, but we can't do it because of the blockages in our process. And now we can't export LNG, so the liquefied natural gas, because of the ban on that. That's going to drive up energy prices worldwide. And I'm really worried about world growth. We keep looking at U.S. growth, which is right, but from the perspective of the world, you've got the U.S. government absorbing giant amounts of capital and spending it in ways that are ineffective, and you end up with a mess globally, and you see that in all of the fragility and the outbreak of wars. People are desperate around the world because there's so much waste going on in the U.S.
David, it's the age-old question, central planning versus the private sector. And now you can add into the mix MMT, because there's a lot of people, modern monetary theory, that think that because we have the currency that's accepted all around the world, and we can always issue debt because we have the reserve currency of the world, that there's no, the roosters will never come, or the chickens will never come home to roost. And that's what we think right now. Now, you combine that with what we hear one side saying now about investment. We're going to invest. If the government knew how to invest more effectively, maybe they can do some things right, but more effectively than the private sector, there would be central planning. We'd all have central planning. That's the way we do it. But the combination of a government that thinks it knows where to invest and MMT is why we're where we are right now. Those two together make it 110% of debt to equity or debt to GDP. We're never going to get out of this, ever.
That's right. And so the debt is growing now. It's $34 trillion national debt, and it'll be $35 trillion by the summer. And
in 100 days. 100 days, a trillion every 100 days, right, David? There's another trillion every 100 days.
That's right. And so you see the inflation numbers from yesterday. It's hot inflation. It means that things aren't affordable for people. So houses aren't affordable. So then they don't make them. So you end up with this. The government is fueling consumption, but you're not getting the supply on the other side, and especially not from American producers on the other side. Maybe Europeans will be making the airplanes. In China, I'm worried about China as well, because their central planning We see what the end product of that is, which is this economy that's kind of freezing up because of they're in a deflation phase because they overbuilt in certain areas, and it's driving down prices. And so the answer, I think, is pretty clear. Not modern monetary theory. People have to speak out on government spending, and I was happy to see Chairman Powell doing that last fall a little bit. The Fed is a really important voice on this. And then I think we also have to really think about a size limit on the government. There has to be some check and balance that pulls us out of this spiral.
If it worked, David, we'd do 10 IRA, Inflation Reduction Acts every year. We'd do 10 every year. We'd have 30% GDP growth because we got 3. And we just have the Fed with a balance sheet of $100 trillion. If it worked, we would do that. But we'd be in Zimbabwe. It would cost $1 trillion to buy a Snickers. That would be real shrinkflation.
But we'd have a lot of electric vehicles that nobody wants and nobody would drive. And they'd be out of power. They'd be out of power because we don't have a grid that's strong enough to support that.
Right. I wonder if we ever learn this permanently. We don't. Every generation has to learn that central planning doesn't work. It gets frustrating, though, when every generation, all of a sudden, 60% of people in college now are socialists, David. We can thank our academics for that.
But at certain moments, people write laws. The Constitution, of course, is the huge example where they knew they needed to have checks and balances. So I think we need to do that on the fiscal side. We also need to do that on the Fed side, on the interest rate side. Right now, we're in this phase where high for long is somehow going to work. I don't see how that's going to increase production or get us into a better spot as a country. Very important is the commander-in-chief. This is the U.S. has a system of where you need a strong executive because that's where the guidance comes on the war efforts, on the Afghanistan pullout, on the problems in Gaza. I was really concerned yesterday by the undercutting of Israel, our ally,
crazy.
by people in Washington. How can that be?